Buddy, well, I was about to say good morning. Out here in California, it's good morning, but wherever you are, welcome. And I'm just going to give folks a few minutes to hop on before we get started. Today, hi Mira, it's good to see you. Today on City Sunday, I thought it would be a great idea to do a question and answer. So if you had any questions about any wellness or mental health topic, I'm here to answer that. Obviously, this is not therapy. We are not doing therapy, but if you had any questions that you were curious about, I'll see what I can do to help answer it. One of the things that is really important for me as a clinician within our Middle Eastern community is to educate as much as possible our communities around mental health. We have a tendency as Arab in general to minimize our symptoms, to dismiss what's going on. By the time we go seek help, it's usually pretty bad. And I thought if we can offer just a little bit of guidance, show people like that a lot of this is normal, a lot of what's happening is normal within the context of mental health, that we can minimize the stigma in our culture around getting help or being vulnerable with one another to say, yeah, I'm struggling. So I got to walk my talk. So I'll share a story. Last week, I went home to visit my family. And before I go visit my family, now they're good people, they're fine. A lot of times when we think we're talking about our experience, it's like, oh, did our family, that's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that there are challenges that need to be overcome. So gearing up to go back to engage with my family and do some family business stuff, I had to really ground myself and stay focused on the task at hand and really have an open heart and an open mind in dealing with each and every person in the family. Now, everybody, I should say most families come with their wounds. Every person in the family comes with their wounds, their anxieties, their depression, in some cases, personality disorder, psychosis, which that's for another topic. So I always try and go in there with an open heart to understand what their point of view is and what their perspective is. Yeah, that lasted about maybe 10 minutes, right? Sitting in the room, and my body immediately gets activated. Before, I would fight them. I was rebellious. I was going off. I was like, Now that I've got some skills, I've learned to just stay quiet, because it's better to not say anything than say something you're going to regret or to exacerbate the situation. So it was a week long of managing my own nervous system. It was exhausting trying to manage all of the dynamics happening. The only thing I could do was regulate myself, my own emotions. And some moments I did okay, some moments not so much. And this is about giving yourself, again, having that self-awareness around what's coming up for you and what's the best thing for you to do for you. So to finish up this story, it was exhausting. It was so hard for me. And I have skills, tools, knowledge. I'm here teaching folks. And within these Arabi family systems, it can be very difficult. So I just wanted to validate to each and every one of you, it takes time. It takes awareness. Some days you might do better than others. All I'm saying is it's okay. All right. Well, it looks like we had a few people join in. I wanted to welcome everybody and thank everybody for joining Siddhi Sunday. My Siddhi, Maria, was a very calm presence in a family of chaos. I would just watch her as a little girl in her tob and in her sitting on her specific chair. And she would say, "Ya, atini sabir, give me patience." And I was like, what are you saying? This is a family that has no patience at all. And, but yet I think that was her mantra, her way of regulating her own nervous system. So I wanted to honor my Siddhi today, because today we're going to just open the floor for people to talk about. Hi, Hannah. How are you? Good to see you. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. It's always good to see you. So let's talk about any questions that people may have on any emotional health topic that they're curious about. Oh, I see my lipstick. That's gross. Anybody curious about any topic? Now, the reason why I chose anxiety on how to manage anxiety, because it's everywhere. Most Arab struggle with anxiety. Arab will tell me, "Tiffany, I'm depressed." I'm like, well, yes, that could be true. However, when we're so anxious and when we're so revved up, that we can feel depressed. So it's the anxiety that's driving the depression. Does that make sense? Does anyone have any questions around that? When you're in your ruminating thought, focusing on detail, working your ass off, doing all these things, just moving, your nervous system's just going to go, yeah, I'm kind of done with that. So what do we do with that? And what are some skills that people do in managing anxiety? What are some things? I can say, as a culture, most self-medicate with marijuana, alcohol, food. These are the three common coping that I see within our community. All right. Welcome. Can everybody see me or hear me? Or I feel like there's no interaction. Oh, thank you, Mira. Eating. Okay. Yeah. Food is a huge one. One of the things around, but say more about eating. I see more emotional eating, overindulgence. Because eating is a very accepted cultural thing. We find a lot of women, this happens to men as well, where there's emotional eating, where we start to feel anxious and we just start to we start to eat, right? We have the bizid and the peanuts and the fusta and all these things in front of us, and then we just start to eat. And that's our comfort. You're filling that void. So yes, emotional eating is a big one. We also see, if I could say this, a lot of bulimia amongst our community. A lot of bulimia. Anything else on how to manage anxiety, or any other questions that people may have? All right. Well, let's maybe think about, what are the things that are making people stressed? Oh, sleeping too much. Yes, very good. Sleeping can be adaptive when you're in a very anxious state, that sleeping can be very, very good. It's when you're depressed and you're sleeping too much where it can become problematic. Now, you have to remember, anxiety is our response to a perceived threat. Now, many of us growing up within our culture, we had to be hyper attuned or hyper vigilant to what was happening around us, who to serve first, who to say hi to first. There's a lot of these things that if as children, if you didn't do these cultural norms correctly, there may have been some punishment on the other side of that. And so growing up, our nervous systems are going to be tuned into things around us are going to be a perceived threat, even when they're not. So it's about having that awareness to tell yourself, if I'm perceiving this to be in danger or threatening, to ask myself, is this truly a threat? Or is this my nervous system responding from what I was conditioned as a child? The idea of perception is really important because especially now we're perceiving everything a threat. We're especially right now, everything is, people are suspect. We're not feeling safe within our world. And how do we shift that perception to go from what is my perception to what is my perspective? And it's zooming out is going to be really important to go, okay, I may perceive this to be a certain way, but what is my actual perspective? Now, I always like to let people know anxiety is adaptive. It is our indicator in our survival. So, Mita, are you the only one on the live? Is anybody on this live? I feel like there's nobody on the live. Sorry for all the disruptions. It's really, oh, good. Okay, I feel like I'm talking to outer, like I feel like there's no engagement. So I'm kind of like, who am I talking to and what is happening right now? All right, I'm just going to give everybody a few minutes. No questions so far about anxiety, what people may struggle with. All right. Well, I'm just going to keep talking then. So, anxiety impacts us both from a mental, behavioral, and physical place. Mental, you may have ruminating thoughts. Physical, your heart rate may start to pump. You will notice your heart racing. You will notice that you may get sweaty or you may feel sick to your stomach. Those are the physiological symptoms. I say if we pay attention to our body, it usually will lead us to where we need to heal. It's our first indicator that something is feeling off. So if you have a stomach ache, you go, what is that? Slow down, pay attention. Your eyes or your pupils may widen. You may start to look around to seek some safety. Your breathing might become more shallow. These are just some of the physiological symptoms to anxiety. Now, we come from a culture that worries a lot. We are, again, I was talking about this hypervigilance. We're constantly worried about what other people think, what the NAS are going to think, what other people are going to say about us. This constant worry and this fixation on things outside of ourselves may impact our concentration, our memory. We may not be able to remember things. And you go, oh, what's going on with my memory? Take a look at your anxiety. What are you really thinking about? Sometimes someone is just being kind and we may misinterpret it as someone trying to hurt us because of our past experiences. Many times in our behaviors, we will avoid. So we may avoid the things that we want to do. We go into escapism. So that's the doom scrolling, the the binge watching TV. Not saying those things aren't helpful. However, those can be ways. There could be poor performance. So when you're so anxious, you may have poor performance when it comes to sports, talking in public, speaking to people, your homework. So I always let people know when you struggle with anxiety, it will impact these other places where you function. So if we can help you to manage your anxiety, usually these other things will improve. However, that's becoming grounded in your own awareness of when you start to feel these symptoms on your body, to slow down and check in. And so how do we check in with ourselves? Okay, so I like to do frequent check-ins for myself because it's important when you're on the go, doing all these things, managing a lot of responsibilities. Maybe just like last week when I was in San Francisco, dealing with I had to do frequent check-ins with myself, say, where am I? How am I feeling? What's going on? To keep my nervous system regulated enough and my emotions regulated enough to be able to manage intense situations. Now, what happens usually? We override the signals in our body that indicate we are in distress, usually. Perhaps if you're hungry, maybe you don't sit down and go have lunch. Oh, I'm going to do all these things. Well, your nervous system is going, hey, feed me. Sometimes you'll have a conversation with someone. Your nervous system is activated. What do we typically do as Adam? No big deal. It's okay. I'll just leave it alone. I'm not going to address it. Or we're fighting by addressing it. And that's not okay either. So it's about really understanding to catch it early. Managing anxiety, I always let everybody I work with know, you got to catch it early. And that's by creating an awareness, doing frequent check-ins. And if you're tired or you're getting grumpy or you start to get angry, slow yourself down. Nothing is that important. There's no urgency. Typically, no one's going to die if you slow down. Figure out what is causing you the distress and then moving forward. Now, anxiety can show itself in a variety of ways, in multiple ways. It can show up in a social phobia, where people are afraid of being embarrassed or being negatively evaluated by others. So if you feel anxious going into an Arabi wedding or any kind of family gathering, and you're perhaps more introverted, or even if you're an extrovert, you're going in there and you're like, oh, I don't want to deal with everybody. You start to get really revved up. And then people are asking you all kinds of questions you don't want to answer or you're not prepared to answer. This is, again, awareness. How do I ground myself before I go into these situations? What questions do I think people are going to ask me that's going to exacerbate the anxiety? And then how can I respond in a way that I can feel good about who I am moving forward, or just that it's in alignment with your values? The social anxiety is a big one because a lot of people say, well, they just don't like being around people, and that's not true. Most people they don't like being around unsafe environments. And to me, that's adaptable. Why would anybody want to be in an unsafe environment? However, within our culture, a lot of times it's about family obligation. We got to be certain places. How, again, can you honor that within yourself to say, I don't necessarily feel safe in this environment. What are the things I need to do for me to feel safe? Because our nervous system is seeking two things, safety and connection. So how do you create that safety, and who can you connect to with, I love the bubbles, who can you connect with to create that safety? So maybe it's a cousin or a family member that you feel safe with and you can spend the evening chatting with them or during the time. hanging out with them. I've seen this, a funny story. I said to one of my jaltos, I said, hey, we have a lineage of anxiety on the maternal side of our family. And the response was, لا ما في عنا anxiety. We're just nervous. And so I started laughing. I said, well, that's anxiety. The amount of denial within our families, it's okay to say we have anxiety. It's very normal within these cultural contexts to have some anxiety. Unchecked anxiety leads to panic disorder, leads to panic symptoms. That's where you feel like your heart is going to come out of your chest. You feel like you feel like you're going to die. That's that sensation. It's that intense. Panic disorder can come on at any time, while driving, while at work. This is why I encourage people, address your anxiety sooner than later. Chronic worry, right? This is where إحنا العرب, we worry about everything and everyone and every nukta and every detail. And it's like, where does that come from? And do you need to worry about all these things? 99.9% of the time, probably not. It's because of this fear of judgment, fear of others talking about you, that you're going to be the talk of the town or the community. And you have to ask yourself, is the stress worth, or these details that I'm focused on, worth whatever outcome? And that's up to you. I'm not here to judge that. I'm just here to give you awareness to think about all the things that you're doing. Because a lot of times we create our own suffering. I know a lot of people get mad at me when I say that, and I don't care. We create our own suffering by doing way too much, and that contributes to anxiety. Another type of anxiety disorder is post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, I've worked with many people in our Middle Eastern communities who have extensive trauma, not just, we call them big T's, little t's. Many within our culture have these big T's. They've witnessed people being killed. They've been victims of war. For some, they have adverse childhood experiences of physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse. That is typically never talked about. And so many times, if we bury our trauma and don't talk about it, that can have significant implications, and you may be nervous and you may be anxious and you may be revved up also because of unprocessed trauma. So that's usually the first line that I work with people, say, you don't have to dive into it now, but is there any trauma in your history that I need to be made aware of? And if there's trauma history and it's not addressed, anything I'm doing with my client is band-aiding until they are ready to address the deeper issue of as to where the crux of their anxiety comes from. I always say, befriend your anxiety. Use it as a gauge of where you may need to heal. Use it as a gauge of what may need to change in your life. Use it as a gauge for you to say, is this thought helpful? More often than not, those ruminating thoughts are not helpful. They just exhaust you. This next one. So if we're going to look at anxiety disorder in the realm of that, obsessive compulsive disorder. More often than not, with Arabi families, in my experience, shows up in cleanliness. Now, this, I believe, is exacerbated by, Nas coming over, not unannounced. I think people don't necessarily do that as much, but back in the day, people would just show up at your house unannounced, and your house had to be tip top, spick span, or again, the shame of being judged, right? Having all the, trimmings in the house to be able to feed them and do all these things. Again, we watched our mothers in sometimes chaos. Yes, the annoying Amto does, absolutely, super annoying, because they feed off, a lot of them feed off doing like hick, oh, shuf hey, she's not so clean. They want to catch. It's really sad. Like, why would you want to harm someone by trying to catch them in not being on point? So the consequence of that, and myself included, the house must be clean at all times. At all times. Now, I remember my therapist, when working with me around this, probably 30 years ago at this point, the first thing he said to me, Tiffany, leave the dishes in the sink overnight. I was like, you want me to what? He said, leave the dishes in the sink overnight. I was like, my anxiety, my body. I said, how can you ask me to do that? Like, there is no way I'm going to leave dishes in the sink overnight. Because I'm thinking, oh, who's right? I could never, right, exactly. Well, yeah, I did it, and everything was fine. My nervous system, so it crescendos. You have to remember, think of your nervous system like a bell curve, like, right? Now, there's the baseline, which most Arab are hovering pretty high, right? Say 0 out of 10, most of us are hovering at about 7 or 8. Now, then the alarm, oh, leave the dishes in the sink. I was like, what's going on? Oh my gosh. Now, in order for the nervous system to get over that, I had to leave the dishes in the sink. And then my nervous system was like, oh, that was okay. That wasn't bad. Now, the issue wasn't the dishes. It was the exhaustion that I would be literally harming myself, trying to get everything done without giving my body rest. Thus the exercise. Can you just give yourself rest? Leave the dishes in the sink. Now the dishes I know always get done. Never an issue. The issue was now, over the years, now that I've gotten over that, I'm able to leave some dishes in the sink, be okay with it if that means giving my body rest or doing something that is going to fill me up. Okay? So this is where, when the OCD, the obsessive compulsive disorder, where like we're all on this spectrum, but the Arab, like keeping it clean, right? I'm going to tell you guys an extreme example of this. I had a friend who has since passed away. She had cancer, OCD, for sure, unmedicated, and so she was struggling with her cancer, complications from the chemo. And then what happened, she was scrubbing the toilet, and she broke her femur. Now, we were there to help her. We were there to support. However, in her OCD, she had to clean the toilet and consequently broke her femur. And from there, things had gotten worse. So I give that extreme example because even with cancer and undergoing her chemo treatments, she did not allow herself to rest or ask somebody else for help, which then had significant consequences upon her. Now, in my case with leaving the dishes in the sink, yeah, it's horribly sad. But خصوصا نسوان العرب, it's very sad. But the reason why I share this is to say especially how to be women, we do not allow ourselves to rest even when we're not well. And I think for how to be men, they just keep going and going and working and working and working and working. They too don't rest. And then what happens? It has significant consequences to the family, to their health, to their wellness. And we wonder why cancer rates are so high, autoimmune issues so high. So I digress, but this is where the obsessive compulsive disorder, because we value, if I could say this, as a culture, we value cleanliness as a culture, that the obsessive compulsive gets rewarded. But there's so much fear of that hamto that's gonna, right? I see lots of jokes and videos about, cleaning underneath the bed and doing all these things, but that's that anxiety, that revved upness versus saying, you know what? The house doesn't always, unless you have that preference, right? And then, but again, giving yourself permission to take a step back. The last bit of anxiety disorder that I wanted to talk about, the type, is hold on. Any questions so far about anything that I talked about? Social phobia, panic disorder, generalized anxiety, PTSD, obsessive compulsive, any questions on that bell curve? So it's you noticing, if I'm waking up in the morning, I'm at a 6 or at a 7, how do I get myself down to a 3 or 4 if you know you're moving into a distressful or alarming situation? And then remember, by continuing to do the dishes every night, even if you're tired, you're not giving your nervous system the opportunity to be able to learn how to regulate itself. So most of us, we just stay stuck in this cycle, not recognizing our nervous system needs to be reprogrammed, very much like a computer. Any other questions? Any feedback? No, you are definitely not the only one. This is so common. In fact, I can only speak to like my group of friends. We laugh at how ridiculous we are. We try and make things humorous. We try and make things light, but we also try and give ourselves permission to say, hey, I'm going to come over. Don't hurt yourself, don't like go out of your way to like, don't do that. Ought to be what our moms did. Like, I'm coming over, I want to enjoy my time with you. Like, Okradi, sit down, let's have some, I want to connect with you. I don't care if there's dishes in the sink but that's where you surround yourself with people that you feel safe with, people that you can connect with. Now, many times, when our anxiety is not well managed, what happens? How are you within yourself when your anxiety is not well managed? What happens? What are some examples? Like when you're emotionally dysregulated in an anxious state, what are some behaviors that you do? I've heard from many Arab, especially, that when we're anxious, we do more. So instead of slowing down, we're doing more. Sometimes there's emotional outbursts. We're a very emoting culture. So like if we're feeling anxious, instead of sharing with the people that are around us, hey, I'm feeling fearful about this, or I'm not feeling safe. That's very vulnerable. Typically, we don't say those things, but we will lash out or get irritable or make a crass comment. or we'll start to argue with the people around us because the impact of the stress is so high. But no one has the language or the capability to be able to help the other person co-regulate. That's the other piece to anxiety, is being around people that you feel safe with, that you can co-regulate your nervous system, just like with children and their parent. When the parent is calm, the baby is calm because they're co-regulating nervous systems. But many of us grew up with very anxious parents, very nervous. Like what Khalti say? Oh, بس احنا nervous. Okay, طيب احنا nervous. Well, guess what? Now our nervous systems, we're growing up with these nervous systems. So now we grow up anxious, feeling fearful, worrying about things that maybe we never would have worried about, but because the people in our life were always worried about these things, now we have adapted ourselves to worry about these things. So a lot of our work around anxiety is removing that conditioning, removing the conditioning of what we were taught. Now, this is where we have to separate who we are from our cultural messaging, because a lot of our anxieties may have nothing to do with what you believe or what you want or what you desire. It has more to do with what's this messaging we received, or how we needed to move in the world. Everything needed to be clean. Everything needed to be, if you weren't, you were shit, you were crap, you were, right? And this is where you have to stop yourself and say, is this in alignment with me or not? And that's where the more you can overcome that bell curve I was talking about, the more you can go against what your fear is. And this is where exposure therapy is really important. Exposing yourself to the very fear. Like you want to quit your job, but you're so afraid. It's like, it's not in alignment with you anymore. You quit your job, your nervous system will go, whew, I'm okay. So the more we can face our fears and overcome them, your nervous system will get more and more grounded in what you want, what you desire. Now, in our culture, I have to say, this is not easy to do because we're constantly getting pushback. One thing I have to say, now I say this reservedly in this day and time. I say this reservedly. In general, Arab love to catastrophize. Now, what is that? It's viewing an event as really horrible and unbearable. Now, in this day and age, we are not, everything is horrible and awful and terrible. Putting what's happening in the Middle East aside for just a moment, if we were to look at our life circumstances and you think about the way in which you're viewing it, many times we're making it worse than what it really is by our negative thinking. I'm not a positivity person either. I'm a neutrality person. How can we have neutrality around situations in our life? Not, oh, this is the worst that's going to happen. How about we don't know what's going to happen? How do we stay present to the moment? As a culture, we tend to future trip. We're always moving the goalpost. I call it moving the goalpost. If they're not married, when are they going to get married? And then they have the marriage. Oh, when are they going to have the baby? You make this amount of money. When is the next? We're always moving the goalpost, and which keeps us from being present in the moment. So this catastrophizing tends to get exacerbated because we're always looking to the future instead of the present. In what are the facts of what's happening today? So if you find yourself in this catastrophizing, find evidence of that. What I love about working with anxiety is I always tell people, go find evidence of that thought. I'm not good enough. You know what? I love working with Otto, because they'll say they've done they will tell me a laundry list of 5 or 6 things they've done. Tiffany, I'm not good enough. I just said, did you just listen to yourself of all the things you just did? Find me evidence of that. More often than not, they find evidence of the opposite. That not only are they good enough, but they're excellent at what they're doing, right? But it's very, very hard for folks within our culture to own their capabilities, to own everything they do. Because again, growing up, there was Amto doing this to our mothers, doing this, or saying your son's not married, or you don't do, right? That we see that it was never good enough. Nothing we did. You didn't serve the coffee correctly. Oh, that used to drive me nuts. You're pouring coffee. Oh, hatiti, too much, too little. What do you mean? I'm serving you coffee. And it was never good enough. So then you think back on your own childhood and you think about all these like micro experiences. Think about it. We were conditioned that nothing was ever good enough. And if you think about, did you ever hear anybody in your family, and I hope these families are different. Yeah, criticism, yes. It was like this, if we were to affirm, that's why whenever I go to family gatherings, I really, and this is from my heart, yes, they're extremely stressful. I usually, and maybe this is something we all need to try and do better collectively, the food is delicious. Thank you. This is wonderful. I appreciate what you're doing. I love the detail of the table, the flowers. I make it a point to let whoever's home I'm in, who are doing this beautiful spread of food, because we typically do, even let's say, okay, maybe there's something that I don't particularly like. Well, doesn't mean that it wasn't good. It just means it wasn't what I preferred. That's okay. But we are not gracious we're gracious in so many other ways, but when it comes to ourselves and when it comes to those around us, we're not very gracious. And we heard our mothers putting themselves down constantly. Oh, yeah, not too much meleh, this, that. It's like, we need to stop that as a culture. And I like to make a list of all the things I've done over the week to really affirm me for myself. It's like, wow, because we forget, we minimize the things that we want to do. We minimize everything that we accomplish because it wasn't affirmed growing up. We have no gauge of what's enough and what's not. And I can say with almost every Arabi person in my life, personally and professionally, oh my gosh, not only is it more than enough, it is amazing. Yet there's so little recognition of that. So how can we, now that we have this knowledge around anxiety, like this is a lot of what's contributing to our anxiety, is to say, how can I not catastrophize and take a situation and really look at it from a neutral place? How do I find evidence of these beliefs? And expose yourself to the very thing that you fear. Now, I say this reservedly. You really need to process that with someone, because it depends on what it is, okay? However, gradual exposure, so like leaving the dishes in the sink, right? Okay, I left it. Oh, one day that was okay. I survived. Nobody died, okay? And then it gave me permission, and maybe a few weeks later, I wanted to go to a concert, but I didn't want to rush. I wanted to get ready and be relaxed. I left the dishes. I said, they will get done. This is about trusting yourself. Now, growing up in these Arabi families, we weren't taught to trust ourselves. We were taught to listen to everybody and everything outside of ourselves. We for many of us, I should say in general, many of us didn't have autonomy of thought. You did what the culture expected you to do. And then the nervousness and the anxiety starts to come up because many times we're doing things we don't want to do. So your body's going, this is alerting you. Your body's saying, pay attention to me, pay attention. You're going against what your essence, what your truth wants. And we override that time and time and time again. And when I went home last week, it really highlighted for me how I don't want to play that game anymore. I don't want to do that anymore. And so everybody's point of development, and there's no right or wrong answer. Somebody said, Tiffany, sometimes it's so hard to do. It is. It's extremely difficult. Yet even if you acknowledge to yourself, okay, I'm feeling unsafe, I don't want to be here. However, how can I stay present to making myself feel as safe as possible? And which leads to stress management. Now that you have some general, now I know I did this real quick, but some general knowledge of anxiety, exercise, listening to music, reading, talking to friends, safe people, okay? Doing things that you enjoy. So it's like all these things that are causing you anxiety or doing for others, you want to do for you. And that's where those pleasure, to fill your cup. You cannot run on empty gas tank. So how do you fill yourself up with pleasurable activities? And sometimes that means leaving housework, leaving your job early, not going to certain events, because we need to fill ourselves up to give us reserve to manage all these other situations. Taking breaks, that's what I always say. Take a break, slow down. Nothing's going to happen. Trust me, that project you're working on at work, it's fine. You're already a superstar more often than not. Changing scenery, that could be just even going into outside, going for a walk around the block. You want your nervous system to start regulating itself, and nature is a really good way of doing that. Another stress management, which is the exposure therapy, is addressing a problem rather than putting it off. So the more you avoid, the more you resist, the more it persists. So remember, and get people to help you. Like if there's certain things, try and get people to help you. Address the problem. It typically does not go away by avoiding it. So those are some things on anxiety, some things for you guys to think about. Find the support. Remember that awareness of your body sensations is going to be really good indicators. And so you can practice not to override them. I'm feeling it in my stomach. I'm feeling tension. All I'm encouraging you to do, what's that about? What burdens am I carrying? Who's the pain in my neck? What's upsetting my stomach? You see? So as you start to develop a relationship with your nervous system, it will help you manage your emotions, helping you to feel safe internally. And then outside, you will start to make decisions for yourself that are for your truth. And that does take practice. With that said, before we wrap up, on, when is it? Wednesday, November 20th, I have a workshop from 6 to 7:30 Pacific time that talks about our autonomic nervous system on how to manage our emotions. You can find the link in my bio. You can also go on my website, tiffanytodamft.com. This is an awesome workshop. It's practical. I'm co-leading it with my colleague Nina Bratcher, who just is a rock star when it comes to simplifying. We will basically talk a lot about the mechanics of your nervous system, because I think people don't understand what your this vagus nerve, and now I'm kind of going down the rabbit hole, but come to the workshop, learn about why your body is inflamed, why it goes into fight, flight, freeze, or fold response. Learn about it. It's a great workshop. I would love to see everybody there. In the meantime, Any questions before we hop off? Any feedback? Anybody that wants to share anything about anything we talked about? Yeah, please. I would love it. The link is in the bio. All the information's there, or you could send me a DM privately, and I could send you the information there. Yes, I would love it. It changed my life, understanding my own nervous system in the states that I can move into. It's a great workshop. It really is. And we do practical exercises that you could take home with you and use outside of the workshop. Anybody else? I wanted to thank everybody for joining Siddhi Sunday, sharing in wisdom, sharing in healing, having us come together as a community with our collective experience, with certain nuances, and then to be able to know we are not alone. We experience many of the same things. How can we empower ourselves with education and knowledge to move forward in our lives in a healthy and well way? So thanks, everybody. Have a beautiful Sunday, and I will see you guys next week.